Moore, who is also a committee member, is going to be able to join us intermittently this morning. And Ms. Hauser is another committee member with me. And so we have our quorum, and hopefully we'll have some more folks join us throughout. See if we have our special guests here yet. I'm not seeing Rebby Kern yet. Wonder if we should wait just another minute here. What do you think, Bonnie?
About starting?
Yeah, do you think we should go ahead and start?
Sure.
Okay. And I know people might be emailing me, and I will send that form out in a little bit when I'm not speaking here. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining our Community Engagement Committee meeting this morning. We have several special guests that I would like to introduce before we get started. And Mix Kern might not be here yet. I'll introduce them again later, but I would like to welcome Mix Rebby Kern, Director of Education Policy at Equality NC, and also Dr. Megan Squire, Professor of Computer Science at Elon University, Ms. LaTarndra Strong, President of the Northern Orange branch of the NAACP, and we have several other community members who may join us throughout the meeting. Some people were unable to join us, but have requested the video link for the meeting afterwards, including some fellow board members, members of the Orange County Sheriff's Department, and the Board of County Commissioners. We appreciate everyone taking the time to view or listen to this discussion. This is going to be a weighty discussion, and it is a privilege and a responsibility to lead this meeting this morning. I want all of us who are leaders to feel the weight of how bigotry and racism affect our school community, our LGBTQ teachers, staff, and families, and especially our students, our educators, employees, and families of color, and especially our students. Public education nationwide has always centered people who are white and straight, and so there is ongoing resistance to change. For those of us who are white and straight, I urge you to talk about racism and bigotry in our school community, not just in the easy spaces like in an NAACP meeting, but among our white and straight peers, our family members, our friend circles, our parent circles, and for those of us who are elected with people who may have voted for us. Please join me in a moment of silence to sit with the weight of this moment. Our goal today is to focus on the importance of our students feeling a strong sense of belonging in Orange County schools. This intangible quality is key to both our equity plan and our strategic plan as a district. I want to acknowledge Dr. Felder and her team who put tremendous labor into crafting our 5-year strategic plan, and Dr. Keeling and her deep leadership developing our school year 21-22 equity plan. These two plans are closely aligned and both speak to the vital need for all students to feel valued, respected, and represented in our school communities. Just two highlights from both plans to show how they are related. Our strategic plan for years 21-26 identifies 4 goals, and goal 4 is empowering culture. Cultivate supportive partnerships among families, schools, and community stakeholders to support students' well-being and ensure all students have what they need to be successful. Our equity plan working document identifies 4 pillars to the OCS Equity Framework. The first pillar of the framework is educational experience, culturally relevant and sustaining teaching, and safe, inclusive, affirming environments. We all know that when we have hate group activity pressing upon our school community, as we have had specifically in the months of September and October this year, both at and around board meetings and adjacent to athletic events, the safe, inclusive, affirming environment vital to our equity plan is threatened, and students' ability to focus on learning is compromised. Today's meeting is in response to the ongoing undercurrent of racism and bigotry in our community, and specifically in response to the recent displays of such behavior. We are, in fact, this morning trying to work towards goal 4 of our strategic plan and cultivate those important community partnerships that can help support student well-being and thereby foster their success. We appreciate all of our guests here to help guide and participate in this conversation. As our guests are speaking, I'd like to mention that there's a Google form for questions that I can help facilitate. And again, I will email that out. If you're just joining and hearing me now, if you can email me at carrie.doyle I can't even think right now what our email address is. Help me out, Bonnie. What's our email address?
orange.k12.nc.us.
Thank you very much. If you will email me, I will forward it to you. Or if you see someone else you know on the call, they are welcome to forward it to you. And that will just help because we have a lot of people. If you're not a panelist, I can't see you raise your hand. And so this way you can ask questions, and we have a lot to listen to with our speakers this morning. So that should help facilitate.
Okay. Miss Doyle, I just forwarded it to all of Cabinet and Extended Cabinet, the link, just so you know.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Dawson. That really helps.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. We just have brief board business this morning, approving minutes from both the May 14th committee meeting as well as from the October 6th committee meeting. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes, or are there any corrections that need to be made?
So moved. Minutes look fine to me.
Okay. Second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And now I will pass the mic to Dr. Keeling, who will lead us in an equity reflection exercise.
Good morning, everyone. Ms. Doyle, do you have the slide? I don't know how to, I don't think I have the ability to share.
Okay, let's see. Does it say share, but it's not lit up on your, Mr. Schofield, can you allow Dr. Keeling to share her screen?
Then you should be able to share now.
I can't tell what you can see because I can't see. Can you see a slide on here?
I can't see it yet, no.
Okay. What do you see? Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I have to actually hit share. Now, can you see?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry for that.
It's okay.
So today I have a short reflection for us because I really don't want to speak long. I want us to get to the speakers. I'm very anxious to hear our presenters today. But I would like for us to look at this picture. And just as it says here on the caption, we're going to tell this story. So I would like for us to think about, where are they? What are they feeling? What's happening? Who is this person? And as you think about that story, and we're going to get ready to share, one person is going to be able to tell us what it is that they're thinking, but I want us to take like 30 seconds to really think about who this character is, who is this person, And I want us to bring it close to home. So I want it to either be yourself or an Orange County School student or a student group, a family, staff member, community, but make it close. I don't want us to think about some very abstract or, you know, in some other part of the world, this is what it feels like. And if the story is not about yourself, then I want you to step into that person. I want you to speak from the first person, but thinking about who is the person in this story. I want you to imagine feeling what they're feeling. So I'm gonna even set my timer so that we just have like 30 seconds to, again, think about who is this person, where are they, what is happening, what are they feeling, what's going on around them. So I'm gonna pause here and I'm gonna give us 30 seconds to just think about that. Okay, so I can't see everyone, so I may have to depend on you, Ms. Doyle, unless it's you that just wants to share, but to see who would like to share. And I'm gonna give the person who would like to share about 2 minutes to just talk us through who they are, what's going on around them, what are they feeling, what's happening to them. And for the rest of us who are not sharing, I want us to really listen to what they're saying. So Ms. Doyle, if you can see if anyone has their hand raised or who would like to share.
Okay, I can see about 12 names right now, but several have their camera off. So if you're a board member, please unmute, or if you're anybody and you want to turn your camera on so I can see that you want to talk.
Carrie, that's funny. You said if you're anybody.
Sorry. Well, I'm seeing Miss Crimmins, and she turned her camera on. She might want to say something, and I didn't mean to be limiting this to board members, so that's why I said that.
Sorry, am I not supposed to? It's.
Oh, you are. This is open to. I wish we could open this to all community members, but that would be really tricky right now. So we're opening it to anyone who's a panelist. Please feel free to participate in this exercise.
Yeah. So Dena, am I supposed to paint the story of who I'm viewing this through? Okay. So
You're speaking in first person, right? You're gonna take on that persona. Yeah.
I will. So I am a senior at one of the local high schools. I have my childhood was not what I would say a typical childhood. I had a lot of anger issues. I was put out of school as a second grader. I lived with my father, who was never around, so I was left with my stepmother. And then I moved to North Carolina with my mother, who had never been my parent because I was taken away from her when I was an infant. So she got me when I was a fifth grader. And I've had a significant mental health issue that my mom just really doesn't understand. In addition, I do have an IEP. I'm not sure why I have an IEP. I know that that learning is very difficult for me. I'm of mixed race, but as I've gotten older, I don't belong in any group. So the way that I process information just doesn't make sense to others. And then I try to express myself and tell them my side of the story, but they don't understand me. And so then I get in trouble, I get suspended, but no one listens to my story. No one wants to hear about the why behind my actions. So I don't feel like I fit in anywhere.
Thank you so much, Connie, for sharing. And I'm going to call on 3 random people. I'm going to see if I can even see people on the screen.
Dr. Keeling,
Yes.
be sorry to interrupt. Before you do that, Mr. Schofield, can you promote to panelists Rebby, Kern, and LaTarndra Strong? Are both, they're both showing up as participants but aren't panelists, just in case they're also wanting to participate in this exercise. Thank you.
And I'll pause to give them a chance to come in, and
There's
you
both
all let me know. Are we ready? Have they been promoted? Okay.
They have.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm gonna try to find just 3 random people, and you're gonna each just share one thing you heard from the story that we just heard. And this is where it's interesting, because I'm gonna just call on someone. So the first name that I see is Kathleen. Dr. Dawson. I don't know if she's completely in the meeting. Oh, she may not be. The next person I see is Miss Hauser.
What, you're asking me to respond to what Ms. Crimmins said? Is that correct?
Yes, just
Yes, so
share one thing that you heard her say.
I heard her say that that this was a socially awkward, isolated male student.
Thank you. Rebby. One thing you
Thank you
heard.
for calling on me. One thing I heard is an expectation of what it looks like to learn, and when that is not customized for a young person.
Thank you. And Miss McKenzie.
I just heard a lot of sadness and struggle from a student that just doesn't feel like school was made for them.
Thank you. And Ms. Doyle, I'm getting texts from some staff members that said that they can't speak or turn on their cameras. They don't have the right to speak or turn their cameras.
Right. So they would need to be promoted to panelist as well. And so if you want to name those people, we can ask them to be promoted to panelist, as well as I'd like to mention Tomika Ward Satterfield, Mr. Schofield. She's showing up as an attendee right now. If you could promote her to panelist as well. She's one of our guests today. Tomika Ward Satterfield.
You've been promoted. Is there anyone else?
I got a text message from Dr. Gammon. So, Ms. Crimmins, what did it feel like to step into that person's experience?
So this particular student has been on my mind a lot lately. He holds a special place in my heart, knowing that I have partnered with him and his mom through his journey in Orange County schools. And right now, I can tell that the sadness and the way that the adults are viewing him and in some ways responding to his anger saddens me, because this is a student who has not been successful in school, and as much as I, the adult, have said it's about a relationship, it's about a relationship, it's about a relationship, I still believe that because of the way he looks, the expectations are here for him, and he, without a relationship to help him build up to those expectations, there's just something missing in the middle there. And I worry about this student.
Thank you. And did you feel heard when the three people said what they heard? Did you feel like that's what you said? Did you feel heard?
Yes, I did.
Good. So thank you all for participating. Today, I want us to work on being able to step into the experience of someone else, even when that's not our experience. I want us to get to the point where we're feeling what it would feel like if that person were to reach inside of themselves and pull out their feelings and put them onto us. Right now, we all have the ability to walk away from these feelings. Like at the end of this meeting, we can go to lunch and really not have to deal with this again until the next time we have to deal with it again. But for some people, they don't get to walk away from how it feels. So I want us to, one, work on that. What does it feel like to not get to walk away? To sit in that experience every day, all day. The second thing that I want us to work on today is to listen. And we've talked about that before, but the ability to listen so that the next thing that can happen is that we create the change that needs to happen so that those who are sitting in the experience don't have to sit in it every day. We all in this meeting have the power and the positionality to change that experience. So as we listen to today's presenters, some of us may not be directly impacted by what they're going to tell us, but I want us to step into what it must feel like for the community. And by community, I don't just mean like neighbors and people that live in Orange County. I mean community in the sense of the word of the connection that we all have. So as connection, as community, I want us to step into that experience of what it feels like. What does that hurt feel like? That anger feel like? That fear feel like? To sit in that every day, but to know for us that we have the power to change that. So last thing, I just challenge us to sit in our discomfort, because I'm sure that it may be discomfort, some of what we hear today. And I challenge us to listen. I challenge us to make the change. I challenge us to sit in the discomfort for longer than the 3 hours that we've allotted. And I challenge us to center the experience of those who have been impacted. And for us to not try to intellectualize or rationalize like, oh, no, it didn't really mean that. For us to not disregard it or to focus on the feelings of those who were not impacted. Oh, well, they may have been impacted, but another group wasn't. So, maybe it wasn't that bad. I would like for us to not make it performative, like to try to think of, well, what's the right thing to say? What's something I heard someone say or something I read in a book that I should be saying? I just want us to listen and to feel, to know that we have the power to change it, and to just center the experience and the feelings and the voices of those who are impacted. Because this may have been an event for some of us, but for others of us, this was not an event. This continues to happen. So centering that feeling of those who are impacted. That's all I have. I will pause to see if anyone has anything else. And I honestly don't even know how to get back and unshare and mute myself. So Joe, if you can help me with that. I don't even know how to do that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Keeling. Would you like me to go ahead and introduce Ms. Kern?
Yes, if, oh, am I being, oh, there we go. Yes, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Ms. Rebby Kern is the Director of Education Policy at Equality NC. Equality NC is a tremendous resource to elected officials and leaders of all kinds across the state of North Carolina, providing, and then this is a quote from their website, training and education to individuals, institutions, businesses, and government on how to provide diverse, inclusive, and equitable environments. I personally have appreciated conversation this past year with Rebby on how to do that here in Orange County Schools, and we are fortunate that they could make time to join us this morning. And so thank you so much for centering us with that listening exercise, Dr. Keeling. And now I will pass the mic to Rebby.
Hey y'all, thank you so much. It's a joy and an honor to be here with you. Please do let me know if my connection is choppy at all. I've been playing with my bandwidth this morning. Thank you. I first want to thank everybody for being here. As it's been stated already, this conversation might feel heavy. And for some of us, it might be really familiar because these are the conversations that we have every single day based on our reality and our lived experience. And so I appreciate that this is being brought into the centerfold. And today I bring another unique perspective. As we are no monolith of a single identity, we actually sit at the intersections of many identities. You could sit and likely spend hours mapping out all of who you are and still not find enough words to communicate that out to people. How can we hold our young people in our lives at the same relevancy, at the same holding, and create more space for all of who they are? So while we're here together today, my goal is to help unveil some of the unique experiences for our youth of color who might also identify as LGBTQ. You'll hear me use the term SOGI to refer to sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression as well. In the meantime, I'm also going to take a moment to share my slides to see if I need additional permissions. Looks like I do need those additional permissions. Cool. I think we did it. Phenomenal. And can you see the whole screen there? Great. Okay, fantastic. Like it has been said, I hope that you all are able to approach this conversation with a mind of openness, knowing that this by no means is a full and complete conversation. This is just a piece along the way. I will do my very best to hold time for questions along the way. And an overview of where we're headed is I'll share a little bit more about ENC, and I'll do some brief grounding in language as the LGBTQIA+ acronym seems endless, ongoing, and changing every day so that we know what we're talking about while we're here. I've pulled some information from a number of trusted sources that are pretty recent from 2020 and 2021 that unpack the specific realities of young people who are cutie BIPOC. I'll use that term to describe youth of color who are also LGBTQ. That stands for queer, trans, Black, Indigenous people of color. I'll talk a little bit about some of the best practices that y'all are already putting into place, broadening that out, adding an additional lens, and then see if we have some time for questions and discussions. Ms. Doyle, feel free to help give me some time alerts if I seem to be going a little too long. So a little bit more about the organization that I arrived to as today. Equality North Carolina has been doing work at the intersection of identity for over 40 years. And a part of my role here is to help support young people within school systems and within large systems as well. So I do trainings like this within healthcare settings to help support our representatives, our senators, to make the best decisions for our young folks, and additionally in settings much like these. Today I've been called to a much higher role because a lot is happening. and a lot of commitments have been made, and we are here to help hold that accountability and reimagine what our culture can look like. So I appreciate being here, that this is beyond a 101 conversation, certainly, and I thank you for trusting me with this. To go over a few key terms and concepts as it relates back to the LGBTQ acronym, I'd like to break down the term SOGI, which becomes deeply relevant for all of the identities that we're talking about, whether somebody is straight, gay, pansexual, or non-binary. When we think about the LGBTQ acronym, we're actually talking about three key concepts that are broken down here. Sexual orientation, or who you love, who you're in a relationship with. Gender identity, your innermost concept of self, whether that's man, woman, non-binary, transgender, or cisgender. And gender expression, all of the decisions that we make to express ourselves out to the world. Everything from our glasses to our shoes and the body wash that we use. The world is often informing these decisions. I don't know if you've been to Target or Walmart, but sandalwood is a man smell and lavender is a girl smell. And apparently that's just how it is. But we know that gender is so much more than which aisle you shop in or which restroom you use. So when we talk about SOGI, we're talking deeply about reflections in policy. We're talking deeply about the experiences that we all have, the ways that everybody uses pronouns. It's a part of our language and not just exclusive to transgender or non-binary young people. A few of the terms that might show up among the LGBTQ acronym, or the alphabet mafia, as our TikTok queens, kings, and royalty are using, might include some of these concepts. So to understand sexual orientation and the terms that we use to describe who we love might be related to gender, like gay, maybe attracted to the same gender, or pansexual, attracted to people of all genders. Around gender identity, knowing that cisgender and transgender are complementary terms. When I was growing up, I would hear things like, I'm normal, but that person's transgender. That creates a lot of tension in community. So how can we, as a larger community up for growth, use language like transgender and cisgender to create complementary descriptions rather than creating any binaries of what's right or wrong, good or bad? So transgender would be somebody whose gender identity is not exclusively aligned to their sex assigned at birth. Or cisgender would be if you were assigned woman at birth and you identify as a woman, you might be cisgender. And that these terms, again, can help us broaden out the conversation so that we're talking about all people and not exclusively about people that might be gay, lesbian, or queer. Queer is listed here. I know it might give some folks the heebie-jeebies to hear it out loud. I totally understand. This is a term that has been reclaimed in a really beautiful way. It's reflected in data, in research, in academia, and is important for us to reflect when young people and our teammates self-identify so that we can describe them well when given permission to do so, and still intervene when that term might be used to harm. You'll see gender expression here to the far right as well, really communicating out that we have interests, we present behaviors, we might even have varying voices and gender presentations overall, that these can be boiled into expression, though it might not always clearly state what our sexual orientation is or our gender identity. It might have a lot to do and press up against some of those social expectations and societal norms about how to show up. We'll talk about how that might be leading to dress code violations, how that might be referring back to some racialized disciplinary actions based on assumptions that might be made on some of these categories, layered with race and disability, socioeconomic status, and the list will go on. And so I want to share a little bit about some of the deep impacts of our young folks here on the ground. While some of this data is reflected out in a national scope, we know that our state does have some youth risk behavior survey data that helps reflect that our numbers are tracking about the same as national numbers. And right now, the Trevor Project is doing incredible work tracking the voices of young people and their experiences on the ground, at school, at home, and among their peers. Something that is deeply revealing is seeing that half of our LGBTQ young people of color, or QT BIPOC, are reporting discrimination specifically about their race or ethnicity. 67% of those are Black youth, and 60% of those are Asian Pacific Islander young people. Now, this is revealing quite a lot. And when we understand the term intersectionality coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, we know that when we experience impact against one identity, likely many of our identities are experiencing similar impact. I can never pull myself out and only be Black. I will always be Black. I will always be LGBTQ. I will always have a disability. All of these identities fit in together as one. And so all of those are impacted, and likely it feels heavier. I'm sure you all are seeing that on the ground and feeling it in your bodies. 75% of our young folks are experiencing that their discrimination is showing up around sexual orientation or gender identity at least once in their lifetime. Whether or not that had happened in the last school year or not, but at some point in time, it's going to come. They're going to have that moment when they realize, oh, this is what they've been talking about. And whether or not they have support in that moment will deeply reveal some of those mental health outcomes as well. And over half of our LGBTQ young people are sharing that they have had those discrimination notes in the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. And I'm sure you all can already imagine what those might look like. But it could be being denied going to a school dance and with the same gender partner, or treated differently, or denied access to tickets because of that. Or it could be not being able to have access to a facility that aligns to their gender identity, or being told you can't wear that skirt because you're a boy. And I'll talk a little bit in best practices about how to work around some of those pieces and some of those bias. To bring out some of this information into a visual way, I did pull out a few snapshots so that we can see what this looks like compared to those who have not been discriminated against at all. And so seeing these numbers on paper is really telling. I always go back to this conversation of, when there's a lake, and there's a beautiful lake in the neighborhood, and I take a walk with my dog every day. And one day, maybe it's a Wednesday, I notice that there is a fish that's gone belly up. I'd be like, whoa, I wonder what that fish has eaten today. Or I wonder if that fish had something bad or got in a fight with another fish. I wonder why that fish went belly up. I don't really think much about it, but I go on with my walk. The next day, I go on the same walk on the same pathway with my dog, and maybe there are 4 or 5 fish that have gone belly up. I really start to think about, is there something different going on here? They couldn't have all eaten the same bad plankton or gotten into the fight with the same fish. I wonder if there's something in the water. And then I take this another level down, and maybe there's another day when all of the fish have somehow gone belly up. I can no longer blame the fish. I can no longer blame the water. I have to dive in deep into the foundation by which the water and the fish and the whole ecosystem is within. This is why you all have committed to be here today, because you're taking a deeper look at the actual foundation that this ecosystem is being built upon. And we can no longer use the same dirt and the same foundation that we have been in the past. And this is why reimagination is so important. And yes, it's uncomfortable. And yes, it's challenging status quo. It will save lives. And this mental health outcome that's been present in the Trevor Project is showing that not only are our LGBTQ young people at risk for negative mental health outcomes, suicidality, and suicide attempts, but when we add race on top of it, it is exacerbating these risks. I'll share some data here in a little bit as well. We're moving into another deadliest year for transgender and non-binary people in our nation. And it specifically hits home because our city, the city where I live in, I'm dialing in from Charlotte, North Carolina, on the land of Catawba Nation. And our city is trailing behind Chicago as the deadliest city for transgender people in the country. And it hits home because this is my family and this is my community. And I'm here to save young people. And if I know that we can do something differently and we can do it at an accountable way from the board all the way down into our support staff on each campus, we can radically change the lives of our young people, keep them in school into graduation, get them into trade school or into college or into the career field, and hopefully keep them out of the school to prison pipeline, which I'll talk about here in a little bit as well. And this is emotional because this is real life. I can imagine many of these noticings as a child growing up, and my dad preparing me for most of it, but not all of it. And I want to acknowledge that when our young folks don't feel safe in school, they're less likely to show up. I think this data has been reflected for at least a decade, and these rates are dramatically increasing, particularly now that virtual school has affected apathy of school. And so how do we re-engage young folks? We're seeing that young folks are twice as likely to skip school because they feel unsafe. But this is also leading to deep connections to not feeling a part of the school culture and school community, that sense of belonging. I'll talk about some local policy and bills that popped up that also are adding to this. But while this victimization is growing, we're seeing that transgender and gender nonconforming Black students, these numbers are skyrocketing even higher than their LGBTQ cisgender Black peers. So when we parse all of this information out, the deeper the intersection is, the higher the rates of impact can be. Now, some of this is real and some of it is actualized. If I have a friend that's been impacted, I'm going to hold and take some of that on. If I see it happen in the classroom and it's not addressed, I'm going to go home and remember that I better not speak up, and maybe it's not a good time for me to come out because of those impacts. And that leads to a lot of negative mental health outcomes. We acknowledge that while our young people are in our care for quite a few years, they also move into adulthood, operate in the workforce, operate within the same systems. And sometimes Power School looks like the Department of Transportation when it comes to forms and documentation. And so there are some clear correlations. But what I know to be true is that there are a large number of Black LGBTQ Americans that live here in the South, the place where we call home. And I think that there is a very high misconception about this, that somehow there aren't queer Black folks that want to live in the South. Particularly rural North Carolinians have such a strong sense of home and community and the place that they call home here. We're also acknowledging that just nearly over 5.5 million LGBTQ people that live in the United States, about half live in states that do not have protections from discrimination, specifically on SOGI identity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. Now, I won't go into the policy rabbit hole because that's a place where I live. Title VII and Title IX have made major updates that will help bring this number to where more people have more accommodations and more protections. But that's a whole nother conversation. If you've been tracking city and town non-discrimination ordinances, we're seeing this conversation become more localized so that when our folks do graduate and move on into the workforce, they're able to carry some of those protections that they have in school back out into the world. And sometimes it doesn't get better when they graduate. Drawing into the workplace that LGBTQ people of color face much higher discrimination in the workforce broadly, and everything from discrimination to anti-LGBTQ impacts, broadly speaking, police interactions as well. But I want to name a specific concept. If a young person, is applying for a job, and the name that's on their resume is not the same name on their legal documents, are employers ready to have this in-depth, equity-focused conversation instead of saying, well, your background check came back weird, so I'm sorry, you're not going to be interviewed for this position? Instead of taking on that equity lens and saying, are we asking the best questions? Might there be a name? Do you go by another name? Is there something that is helpful for us to know through your background check? to provide people a way to say, I'm transgender, I transitioned in 2011, and this is my old name that might show up on my background check. And that's kind of how Power School relates back out into the real world, that goes from class rosters to school to employment resumes. So thinking through some of those pieces, knowing that racial impacts are already very present in the workforce. I'd love to see more Black physicians in my lifetime, and I hope that that is growing, shifting, and changing as well. In addition to this, accountability is massive. And the one thing that I hear most frequently is, I wanted to do something, nobody would listen. Or I tried to talk to a mental health professional and they didn't believe me. Those are heartbreaking stories to hear. We're seeing that over half of Black LGBTQ students believed that staff were not going to do anything about it at all, so they didn't report it. We only have the data of what young people tell us. So we can only assume that there's far more happening out there than what we are actually receiving. Breaking down some of that data even more, about a third of staff are reporting effectively. I don't know about y'all, I want this number closer to 98% of staff that are prepared to respond in a way that's equitable and effective and centers the needs of the young person that was victimized. And sometimes that doesn't happen. We're seeing that less than half of Black queer students told a family member that they faced victimization at school. And among those families that did receive that information, 63% did indeed talk to a teacher, a principal, or a school staff. So when we look at that, right, we're here about community engagement. How do we include all levels, all circles of a child's life to be a part of this healing? And this is where some of that restorative work comes in, where we give up the disciplinary action and instead go back to, how can this child do their very best? Going back to that idea that we talked about earlier in the beginning of our session here. Are we hearing what's happening? And are we guiding ourselves by what is heard? Not what we think needs to happen, not what we think this person should be doing, but really truly listening and creating unique and curated responses to each one of these moments. Yes, it's work and it's saving lives. And I'm glad that y'all are on this track to make this happen. The reporting and accountability piece, again, it goes deeper, and this report from GLSEN is also revealing that for young people who are experiencing school discipline, they're less likely to return back to the classroom, generally speaking, and that multiracial young people are experiencing far higher victimization overall. And again, bringing that LGBTQ lens back into the game, this is really, really deep. And so if half of our LGBTQ Black students specifically, widening that out to thinking broadly about QT BIPOC folks, are receiving detention, out of school suspension, or expulsion, going back to the lake, is it because these young folks have done something against policy or to harm another student? Or is there bias? There's an example here of what this looks like in real life. If you happen to be near your driver's license or your wallet, I ask that you pull that out. I was pulled over one time in Matthews for driving over the speed limit. There's this beautiful section where it's 35 miles per hour. And I will admit, I was driving over 35 miles per hour. When I was pulled over, when I got the ticket to go down, my race was listed as white. And we could spend hours unpacking that. I understand my privilege as a white passing person in many ways, and I use that privilege to open the doors for others and pass the mic wherever possible. And when I looked at my driver's license, I looked at the race, and race was blank. So I'd like for you, if you did grab your driver's license, to take a look at your race category and just notice what might or might not be there. This opened up the door for me to deeply understand what SROs might be doing on school campuses. That if a trained police officer can list a race based on their eyeballs, based on their learned bias, based on the perception of the moment or where they are in time and space, then how might some of these same officers be acting out of their own bias on our school campuses? And this is tough to hear. I understand that. And I understand that we are in a time that we have to have these hard conversations. But while white is one of my identities, I show up as a brown person in this world. I'm Nigerian and Kenyan, and yes, I'm also Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. And what does that mean for our young people, even broadly, that are dark-skinned, that are moving in the world with natural hair that the world tells them that they shouldn't? Are they receiving disciplinary actions because of their natural hairstyles, because the holy shirt that they have is the only polo shirt that they have that's clean that week? How are they meeting them and hearing their greatest need and getting them back into the classroom? So I share that experience with you just as some food for thought, and I'm going to move us into a couple other pieces of data before talking about best practices. And I see that the time ticking down here as well. In the Human Rights Campaign Foundation work, they continue to reveal stories from young people that help us understand where we're at. We notice that school counselors can save an LGBTQ person's life, or they can make it significantly more dangerous. A supportive, open-minded, protective counselor can allow a closeted queer person the space to be themselves and to feel safe at school. So how can we get more of our counselors and school social workers a chance to help offer that healing? Or maybe before we go to disciplinary action, we practice more restorative practices when we know that a young person is carrying a lot in their backpack. From the moment they wake up to the moment that they go to bed, all of what I've just gone over could happen in a single day. Instead of setting them into the pipeline, how can we then create that healing for them? Less than 30% of LGBTQ folks say that they're comfortable talking to school counselors about their identity. Add race onto this number drastically decreases. And that is similar in our mental health professionals and healthcare professionals outside of our school settings. It doesn't mean that people don't want care. They're less likely to get care if they don't have inclusive care to receive. And our schools is a first place to honor that. I want to bring just a lens here of what this has looked like on the ground, because how might our young people be effective when the ongoing rhetoric in their world is against them? We saw 3 bills pop up here in our state. House Bill 358 sought to ban transgender young people from participating in sport in alignment to gender identity in middle school, high school, as well as college. Noting that the NCAA has a plethora of policies that they've been working on since 2014 and beyond, the IOC as well, that the government sought to create a problem and something that's already being taken care of. Senate Bill 514 sought to limit and ban healthcare provisions around gender affirming care. Our young people go through social transitions when they're in our care at school. Likely when they're out of our care as adults and in the world, they might engage in medical supported transition care. Senate Bill 515 sought to widen religious refusals. So if this all was very anti-LGBTQ, predominantly anti-transgender, our young people are reading even more news than we are. They are talking about it, they're hearing about it, they're living through it. And what might this say to a young person who is just trying to find a place to call home? You heard me mention earlier that we are on track to be the deadliest year for transgender and gender nonconforming people in the world. Right now, the Human Rights Campaign, they've been tracking this data since 2013, not to say that trans people have not been on the line in the streets for quite a long time, but these attacks are becoming so high that we have to understand that if the rhetoric across the country right now is anti-LGBTQ, then might people be empowered to act against the queer community in this way? Might young people be empowered to bully, cyberbully, victimize, and harass our young people because they have backing to do so? This is terrifying statistics. What we noticed this year is that 2021 saw a record number of anti-LGBTQ bills across the nation. 250 bills introduced, close to 50 have been signed into law. In 2016, we saw the second number of anti-LGBTQ bills, about 200, and that followed marriage equality in 2015. So 2020 was a major year in an administrative, a federal administration shift. And so there's a lot to be said about the why this is happening and a holding on to status quo. So we have to be able to do something about this. I know I have a few minutes left and I would like to spend time here talking about best practices overall. You all as a district, as a community, are already addressing so many of these. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, and I'm happy to send this presentation out to be available to those present. And what this looks like when it comes to policy and procedures, when we train up our mental health professionals in schools to offer an intersectional lens, to offer restorative justice practices, we're actually helping create a new culture on campuses where we can address bullying behaviors and help move people on the line in towards a more community-driven aspect. We have to establish these school policies to be inclusive of LGBTQ identity and radically anti-racist. And you all, I commend this work so much to name upfront, we do not welcome this here in our community. We have to be that explicit and say that time and time again, because our students deserve to hear us move up in power for them. This continues to blend deeper into the overall culture, climate, and our counseling services on campus. When our staff are given adequate professional development to help represent QT BIPOC folks, the history, the events. I know curriculum is a big conversation right now, but don't our young people deserve to have windows into the lives of others and mirrors to reflect who they are? Dorothy Espelage also does research that elementary is absolutely not too young to have these conversations because our families have two moms, two dads, a grandmother, past parents, incarcerated parents, and how do we welcome all of that diverse family into the conversation? And young trans people are understanding their gender identity as young as the ages of 3, 4, and 5. And so how do we also support our staff? We often spend lots of time talking about our students, but do our staff also feel adequately supported to transition in employment with us, to be out and open without parental lashback? And how might they also receive that same care and support for their own mental health and wellness practices off of campus? Are staff prepared to intervene when they hear racist remarks, anti-LGBTQ remarks, so that they're also not the ones creating some of this harmful language? When we think about inclusive curriculum, I have to name that culturally informed, LGBTQ inclusive, comprehensive sexual health information is saving lives, it's reducing teen pregnancy, and it's helping build efficacy as well as self-improvement for our young, queer, QT BIPOC folks across the world. And our libraries deserve to have these stories reflected in them as well. I appreciate being able to be seen and honored in this space. And while my honorific mix is not on every drop-down menu I come across from Spectrum Internet to the DMV, knowing that I can be seen and uplifted here in my whole self helps me believe that our young folks are in really great hands with y'all. So how can we also broaden this out where Power School might not always have all of the drop-downs that we need, but we might be able to influence our forms in broader ways? Parent 1, parent 2, or guardians, instead of mother, father when it comes to signatures. Having any optional age appropriate identity check sheet so we can help track data of LGBTQ and transgender folks on campus wherever that's possible. Practicing inclusive language is always an everyday practice, shifting from ladies and gentlemen and moving into hey y'all and maybe hey friends or hey folks. Knowing that when we're out in the world, some of our workplaces are also broadening this out shifting away from waiter or waitress, moving in towards language like server or flight attendant. And I am not saying don't say ma'am or sir, but maybe also understand that for some of the trans and non-binary people in your life, they might not welcome this language. And how can you become more comfortable at using additional honorifics or going by a first name basis when given permission to do so? And it's always an ongoing practice. And again, including the mixed honorific into all of this. Language indeed does matter. And so how might we be practicing some of this language by giving up outdated terms like pre-operation or post-operation trans? We wouldn't say, hi, I'm straightened. And so we wouldn't say, hi, I'm transgendered either. And so being really clear when there are harmful terms that are used in space, knowing that drag performers are not a gender identity. If you watch RuPaul, you'll know it is a grand, theatrical, beautiful performance and a pathway for income for many people here in our state and beyond. Y'all, I went over a lot of information, and so I do, if I have time left, I would like to hold some time here to see if there are any outlying questions, anything that was not addressed, or any major takeaways before I pass the floor to the next incredible speaker. Awesome. I see a hand from Hillary.
Hey, Rebby, I just wanted to thank you for this presentation and for being here to give voice to this, and also for all of the advice and collaboration with us earlier this year, working on our gender support guidelines. We would not have that policy in place without your help, and I'm just deeply grateful to you. So thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. You're setting a strong precedent for our state, and I've had many people ask to refer back to that. So thank you for helping inform other districts across the state to do this great work.
Rebby, thank you so much for speaking. You're such a powerful speaker, and you just do an awesome job of inviting everyone in to understanding a broader or different perspective, and I thank you so much for that. I want to mention that in the comments, so there's a Google form, and if you're joining us, if you email me at my carrie.doyle@orange.k12.nc.us, it populates forms so I can pass on comments and questions. And there was a comment from someone who said that some staff don't even feel safe to put the safe zone sticker on their doors. How do we create a culture where staff feel empowered to respond to anti-LGBTQ acts? So if we can sit with that, board members, we have more work to do, and these are exactly the type of comments we need to be hearing. You know, is there a teacher who refuses to use they, them pronouns with a student, even as requested? How quickly can we respond to that? Staff members not feeling safe.
These are really important things to marinate on. Yeah, and thank you everybody for bringing those pieces up and for sharing those reflections. I could sit here for another hour and unpack things to do, and y'all already know how to work on that. So I'm glad for that. Well,
Rebby, I know you were hoping to be able to stay throughout the meeting. If you're still able to do that, we will continue to weave in some of what you said, particularly in our last hour when Ms. LaTarndra Strong is going to facilitate our conversation. And if it's okay at this point, I will pass the mic to Dr. Megan Squire. Thank you so much, Rebby. And I really appreciate you're willing to share the materials too, because I had to just sit and take it all in, and I couldn't take notes fast enough. So I will be rewatching this myself.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Megan Squire is a professor of computer science at Elon University. She is a nationally known speaker on social network analysis of hate group activity. Megan is a Belfer Fellow with the Anti-Defamation League. And I know that Dr. Squire was already speaking across distant time zones this morning, and we are grateful she made time to speak with us here in Orange County. She's going to try to cover a range of topics for us, including in-person versus online hate group activity, identifying hate groups, technology platforms most exploited, and cyber safety. And so I see that she has already been promoted panelist, so I will pass the mic and please welcome Dr. Squire with me.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here. Can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. I'm going to try to share my screen now, so this could be exciting. I have a little presentation and everything. Does appear that I have that option. All right, cool. You should be able to see slides then. Give me a heads up. Okay, awesome. All right, so yeah, as explained, I'm Megan Squire. She, her are my pronouns, and I am professor of computer science. Can be a very applied thing. So the application area for my research is studying extremism online, particularly of the far right variety. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is very localized to your area, but I'll pull on the things that I've learned in my research, particularly in the realm of online extremism. So I'll give you some thoughts as we go. So I'm a computer scientist, specifically a data scientist. So what this means is I collect massive amounts of data, photos, images, videos, text, links. It could be, just any variety of data, currencies, timestamps, all that good stuff. And then I use techniques from computer science and statistics and stuff like that to sort and arrange to answer questions. And so the social questions that I most am interested in are things like online radicalization and how that works. How does propaganda spread? Things like that. Okay, so that's kind of my background and what I do. Today, I thought we could cover a few things, and the list was quite long, but I tried to boil it down, and I figured I have a bunch of teachers here and like smart people, so giving you a little outline. So this is what we're going to cover. I know it seems like a lot, but really the last bullets are really what we're going to be talking about. So we'll talk about a little bit about beliefs of some of these groups. I was requested to talk about signs and symbols, so I have a little bit on that. And then we'll talk about activities, so online and offline activities of these groups and individuals. And then understanding the local landscape. So this is the YS part. Political, historical, and geographic factors that come into play when thinking about these issues for our local region. So we'll start with beliefs. And by the way, I'm going to stop periodically during these just to take questions and stuff like that. So I'm kind of a leisurely pace, but I think there's a forum where you can type questions in or something like that. Oh, and by the way, at the end, I also have the full notes and then links and stuff. So when I show images or links or things like that, you'll be able to get those later. So first things first, we need to talk about some terms. There's a lot of them out there, and there's not a whole lot of agreement on what are the best ways to refer to some of these types of groups. So you might hear words like hate group or extremist. Sometimes you'll hear people called terrorists, domestic terror, far right, radical right, alt-right, any of those types of terms. Sometimes, especially when talking about incidents like the January 6th insurrection in DC, you'll hear words like anti-government or anti-democratic. Sometimes people will refer to authoritarian tendencies in these different groups. As far as the organization of the groups, you might hear words like militia or gang or sometimes movement. In terms of what they believe, you might hear words like supremacy or nationalism, separatism, accelerationism, and exterminationism are tactics that some of these groups use. And so there's a lot of vocabulary here, and it's going to be kind of overwhelming. The words that tend to trickle up the most, I guess, or are used the most, and the ones that I tend to use as well, are words like hate group, extremist, especially if it might be preceded with right-wing or far-right extremist, and then the word anti-government. These words are the ones that are used the most by groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is a group I work with a lot, and the Anti-Defamation League, or ADL, which is another group that I work with a lot. So these are typically the words that I'll use, but we can get into some of the others if you have specific questions about those, or when, why particular terms are used or not used, what have you. No matter what we call them, the types of groups and individuals that I'm going to be talking about today have certain likes in common. So they tend to like whiteness, maleness, authority, tradition, and control. So these are kind of the commonalities between all of those groups. And some of them stress some of these more than others. You might see a group that's really into maleness and authority, less concerned about whiteness, or vice versa. But typically they'll tend to like these things. And a lot of times they'll tend to dislike things like change, particularly demographic change. So the way the country is changing to become less white, for example. They also tend to not like democracy and equality and some of those kind of values, multiculturalism, things like that. So they'll tend to react negatively to those types of things. So in general, these are the likes and dislikes of the groups, I guess. Now, sometimes we'll talk about radicalization. So how do you get to become one of these dislikers, right? How do you get into one of these groups? And this is one of the main research questions that I think about the most, and one of the ones that I collect the most data on and spend the most time studying. So it's worth probably us talking about what this process is. Because as you see your students coming through school, or there's people in your community or even in your family that you know that seems to be maybe going down a path. What's actually going on there? So the process of radicalization, I've boiled it down into 3 steps, is basically how do we get someone to believe something and then to act on that. We're going to first establish a grievance. So this could be, there's not enough of something to go around, or your life would be so much better if you had the X thing, or isn't it so sad that you don't have X? You really deserve it, that sort of thing. So you're going to establish in the person a grievance, a reason why they should be disappointed with their life. Then you're going to transfer that grievance to a group. So you'll say that group Y is the one that's responsible for you not having X, right? It's their fault. Or that all members of group Y are the same and they're never going to give you X. They're never going to give you that thing. Or that you're a member of a group, so our group has always been against group Y and they've never given us what we want. And so it sets up this sort of eternal battle kind of idea. The third step then is that action becomes justified as a moral imperative based on the grievance that was set up and transferred to the group. So you can now justify action against that group. This is what we would consider the radicalization process. So how this happens, how do you establish the grievance? How do you transfer the grievance? Then what are the actions? That's kind of like the next step of what I study the most. So another way to look at that same radicalization process, or the action phases, is something that the ADL put out years ago. It's called the Pyramid of Hate. And you might have seen this before. And it kind of starts off with like biased attitudes and sort of minor things at the bottom, more minor, stereotyping, things like that. And then as you move up the pyramid to ultimately genocide would be like for example, the Holocaust, things like that. To systematically annihilate people. But you have these phases on the way up the pyramid that represent the different levels of action that you could take. So first we radicalize to belief, and then we morally justify action. So that's sort of the radicalization pathway. And this is definitely a pathway we don't want to be on. We don't want to know anyone on this pathway or whatever. So a lot of the prevention work that you'll hear me talk about at the very end of this talk is in noticing when someone is on this pathway and how to get them off. So we will talk about that later. But for now, we're just still learning about what these groups are and what they believe. So this is an important aspect of that. I do study radicalization pathways a bunch, as I mentioned before. This is an example of one that I showed to a group last week. Actually, we were talking about a group called The Base, which is an accelerationist white supremacist group. It's largely defunct now, but it does still exist and it's still sort of limping along. But one of their members was a military guy from Canada who was arrested in 2020 in January, some weapons charges and some other things like that. But I had collected data on him way back in 2017 from Facebook, and he was in these sort of groups at the bottom, Facebook groups you can see there. There were sort of these meme sharing groups and stuff. So what I learned from that data collection was that how he started, how his belief system started, how he kind of got into this world. And it was on social media platform Facebook, and it was through just sort of jokey meme sharing groups. So we see this fairly frequently. It's a common radicalization pathway. The entry point of I was just joking and it was just funny kind of thing, and then it can quickly snowball. So 3 years later, he's arrested for being in literally a terrorist group. So another event that I studied as a radicalization engine or a vector was the Unite the Right rally. And I have a lot of work on this on my website, so you're more than welcome to check that out later. But I just show a little snippet of a social network diagram that I drew here with some software showing the groups, Facebook groups, that sent members of those groups to the Unite the Right event. And they were, as you can see, from a variety of sub-ideologies, everything from Confederate groups to neo-Nazi groups and anti-government militia-style groups, all sent their adherents to the Unite the Right event. So it was a radicalizer, you know, it was a uniter, I guess, literally, unfortunately. So the next thing that I was requested to talk about was signs and symbols then of the group. So once you're on this radicalization pathway, you have, you know, a group or individual working to get you to believe what they believe and then to ultimately take action in a certain way. How can you tell what that group is? Or how can you, like, what does it look like when this is happening? Are there things in common between the groups so that we can, you know, notice them or see them more easily? So I used to give this talk pretty frequently, and I had a slide in it that looked like this. It's a hideously ugly slide. It's full of swastikas and horrible things. And I quit showing that slide, not because it's awful, but because it changed so frequently that with this new signs and symbols that I was constantly having to keep the slide updated. And also there's no way that anyone could memorize all of these. It's like too much, right? There's too many different styles of groups and they're just changing too frequently and too often. So what I do now instead is direct people to the professionals online who keep databases of these signs, symbols, slogans, words, all of that stuff. One of those is the ADL. I've mentioned them several times, and I will mention them several more times as we go, but they do have an online database called Hate Symbols. The URL's there at the bottom, and again, I provide it in the notes, which I'll give to you later. But they let you search by keyword. They also let you search by category, so you can kind of dig in and learn about different symbols. And I mean, it's pretty comprehensive. It's everything from sort of like prison and gang symbols from the 80s, all the way to like current memes that are popular with the very online and more youthful groups. So instead of going through the groups and symbols and signs one at a time, which I think would be really tedious, I'm going to direct folks to how to find more information. If you get really into this, there's also a Wikipedia page that lists all of the ADL symbols, one after the other, and you can actually click in and learn more about that symbol, like way more about it, more in depth about where it came from, what's the history of it, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to pause there. If there's any questions that have come through or anything like that before we move on to activities. So just things that we talked about already would be the different beliefs of the groups, basic beliefs, the radicalization pathway, and then the signs and symbols, which I kind of glossed over a little bit, but only because I wanted to show you how to find more information on your own on that one. So Carrie, did you notice if any questions came through, or should I just plow ahead?
I think I haven't seen any questions.
Okay.
Yet.
Sweet. All right, we'll save them up then for the end, because that's the best part usually, is when I get to actually hear what folks think and what they want to know more about. So the next thing, once you've been radicalized into one of these groups, or you've started to poke your toe in and start thinking about taking action, what are some of the activities that these groups engage in? What does that look like on the ground? I've divided these into online and offline. So I mostly study the online activities because that's where data is most available, but I also have some offline projects that I've worked on too. So online activities can include the same stuff that we would do online, really. You know, as regular people, you organize your life online, you kind of, you know, do different things. It's some of the same stuff. So they do event planning, exchanging contact details, things like that online. They'll use the same websites that, you know, normal people use as well. Same tools. They do a lot of community building online. A lot of times this does take the form of in-jokes and using pseudonyms, starting fan clubs for different content creators that they particularly like, video channels, that kind of thing. They're creating kind of like a little clique or a little club online. the in-jokes are an important part of this. There's almost a specialized vocabulary in a lot of these communities. I've actually had to create lexicons and dictionaries of all the words that they use in order to train some of my software to recognize them a little bit. So it can be a little bit challenging to keep up with all the jokes and, you know, terminology and stuff like that. They also use online spaces to spread propaganda. So this again is part of that radicalization engine, trying to get people to believe what you want them to believe. I've done major projects on far right-wing extremist podcasting, video streaming. They will share memes to a great degree, and even news sites like the Daily Stormer and things like that. They'll take the day's news and then put their sort of hateful spin on it. Some of the projects that I've worked on in this area, I mentioned podcasting. So this is a network that I built out. You can read more about this one on the Southern Poverty Law Center's website. Our project came out about 3 weeks ago. But this was a 3-year-long project with over 4,000 episodes of podcasts from 18 different shows. There were 900 different cast members, which you can see on the diagram represented by little circles. And the podcasts themselves are colored differently. And what I did was build an animation to show how the podcasts have changed over time, how the cast members have grown, and how the network actually grew at certain times, so that we can learn what political events and what events in culture were spurring the growth of the podcast and in what direction it grew, so we could track the propaganda a little bit better. It was a big project. They also engaged in a lot of cyberbullying and harassment. I want to spend a moment here to talk about this because it's something that the students that you come in contact with will probably have either unfortunately been a victim of, or at least have seen other people engaging in. So cyberbullying and harassment can take many forms. It does usually happen online. Cyberbullying kind of makes sense, right? It could be things like raiding game channels. So, you know, your kids are playing a game and all of a sudden their, you know, system gets overrun by people who have come from a different place, you know, spraying negative imagery, hateful speech all over the channel. Brigades are another term for a similar activity. Doxing refers to collecting people's personal information and spreading that online. There can be stalking behaviors that are engaged in all of that. And then just harassing people, you know, following them around online and leaving nasty comments under their posts on, you know, other social media channels, stuff like that. These activities are relevant to a variety of online spaces, not just far right-wing extremist or hate group spaces, anti-government group spaces. It's just that they happen a little bit more in those hateful spaces. And the reason is that a lot of those groups use this as a team building, community building activity. So, hey guys, let's all go on a raid to this, you know, LGBT kids channel or something like that. So they'll really use it as a community builder, which is, you know, horrible, obviously, but it does happen a little bit more in those types of spaces. I did a talk, this is an unflattering picture that I just took the first screen grab, but I did a TEDx talk, which again, I'll give you the link to that later, where I talk a little bit more about the harassment issue. I also go in a little bit deeper on some of the projects that I worked on, but at the end, I do cover the process of collecting data about some of these harassment campaigns and how that looks. So if you want to watch that one, it's about 10 minutes long. Offline activities are all similarly can be grouped, so we can start to think about them as you know, chunks rather than just getting overwhelmed with all of them. And some of these you might have seen these offline activities might actually be the impetus for this the request to have me even come talk. You may have started to see some of these groups in the real world, so we'll talk about those for sure. Offline or IRL, in real life activities. Buying things. So this is a pretty low stakes activity, but it does happen in the real world. It's real money transferred to a real person to get a real good or service. Sometimes it's an online good or service, but a lot of times it's t-shirts, paying dues to a membership-oriented group. So Proud Boys, for example, they still take dues. Oath Keepers, groups like that you might have heard of in the news. Contributing to GoFundMes or other fundraiser type things. Buying subscriptions to content creators online. So you become a fan of someone on a YouTube channel or whatever, you buy a monthly subscription to get special content, things like that. So hate groups engage in all of these. So do regular folks do all of these things too. But they can be money makers, for hate groups, but particularly they're community builders again. So it's having that person take that one step or dip that toe in to buy a t-shirt, right? It signals their affinity for the ideas of the group. I did a big project on this, particularly the money made by online video streamers. So on the screen, you can see one of the tables from a huge project that I did last year on, or actually came out in June, but live streaming video take. So this guy here, Nick Fuentes with the giant megaphone, was at January 6th insurrection. And in the 10 months leading up to that event, he made $93,000 just by taking video donations from users during videos. So most of them were small donations, but he did have a few mega donors. A lot of these video streamers are enormously popular with younger folks. They, in fact, use websites and video gaming sites to do their live streaming. So the video gaming sites oftentimes don't even realize these people are on there using their technology for this. So it can be a little bit tricky to track down. This guy, Nick, this is his daily monetary take. So every day that he streamed is one of the blue lines. You can see many days where it's over $1,000, $2,000. Some days, 3,000 and up. He streams Monday through Friday, so weekends are off. So you can see there the weekends represented by the yellow lines. I mean, this is a job for a lot of these people. It's not just entertainment. This is how they earn money. This is what they do for their job, for their living. They do transfer the video streaming into real world actions a lot of times, which is why it's relevant here. So not only are they getting paid with real world money, but they're actually showing up to real world events. You can see the video streams around the election, around Stop the Steal events that started around the December timeframe. And then you can see this video streams around the January 6th insurrection. Another way that these groups will transfer their hate into real world is through meetups. So they might have book clubs. I know it seems ridiculous they would have book clubs, but they do. The Daily Stormer kind of infamously ran one called the Daily Stormer Book Club. And they would, those were in numerous cities around the country. Sometimes I'll call other things like pool parties or whatever. They'll have little in-jokes names for their things. They'll go to bars and hang out. They'll go on hikes. A lot of them will, try to get back to nature type thing. Some of them even have conferences. So especially the more older, I don't know, called Nazis in suits type of groups, right? But they'll have conferences, once a year. They have speakers and name tags and the whole thing. So again, the same stuff that regular groups do, but these groups have so much more nefarious purpose. They also will meet in real life for hazing and group initiation tasks. So those things can't really happen online very effectively. I put stickering and flyering under this category because you may see groups around town putting up stickers for their group, or you might see, especially on social media, people will be tearing down stickers or trying to cover them up. You might see a local news channel covering flyers were found, or, the Klan used to take little flyers and put them in baggies with candy and throw them on driveways and stuff like that. So those types of activities are partially propaganda, but they're also a hazing ritual. So to prove that you're worthy of membership in the group, they'll give you a low stakes task like that to do. Here, new member, go put up these 20 flyers around this college campus or whatever. So for a while, I was tracking those events using a Google map. You can see one of those here. This was campus only, university campus stickering and flyering, and I think it was 2018 or something like that. And I had colorized by which group was doing the activity and, trying to understand the patterns and like which, universities are getting hit more. It's a little bit of an indicator of where the membership is, stuff like that. It got to be really overwhelming though. You can see here, SPLC and ADL both started doing stickering and flyering maps after that. They did a much better job. They have like actual staff who can, just work on this problem. And so here's the SPLC's flyering map from this year, 2020, 2021. And it's almost completely dominated by red circles. Those represent Patriot Front, which is a group that really uses this technique a lot. This is one of their main things that they do. One of their main techniques for building community amongst the group. And then the last activity we can talk about is one that you might have seen in Orange County. So street activism. This would kind of be the most, I guess, would require the most buy-in. If you compare this to like buying a t-shirt online, which is pretty low stakes. Meeting up at a bar, maybe a little bit more. Stickering or flyering, you're potentially getting some charges here for vandalism, that kind of thing. Street activism is the highest stakes event. So this is where you're actually going to hold your own rally. You're going to give speeches somewhere. You might go to counter protest a Black Lives Matter event or something like that. You might show up at a school board meeting, talk about critical race theory as a guise for some of your other beliefs. And then a new category of street activism that I really started to see a lot last year in 2020 during the summer protest season, I guess, was this idea of protecting things. So these far right-wing extremist groups would show up armed to protect either shopkeepers from, ostensibly from looters who are going to, come and loot their store or whatever, or they would, protect the state house from being taken over by protesters, what have you. So that is a concerning one because, of course, then there's weapons involved, which is never a great combination. So anyway, this is a variety of offline and IRL activities that you might see these groups and individuals engaged in. Last
Megan,
little bit. Yeah, what you got?
Would you include protecting statues, Confederate monuments with the protecting?
Yeah, I'm not really sure if that's a, yeah, that's a good point. I'm not sure if that's a protest, a counter protest, or a protecting incident, but yeah, absolutely. I think a really, really good example of that was down in Salisbury in 2020, I think it was in June. There was a man, a Confederate sympathizer, who actually turned out to be a League of the South member, but we didn't know it when the news stories ran, but he showed up armed to protect the Salisbury Confederate statue there during a very small neighborhood Black Lives Matter support march, which was, family march type of thing. But he showed up to protect, quote unquote, the statue, and his gun ended up going off, and I think it hit someone in the foot. I forget the exact details of it. Anyway, it was, kind of a mess. And I think that statue did get taken down now. I'd have to double check on that, but which is, probably good. But yes, a lot of times they'll show up to protect stuff like that. Not just stores, but you're right, statues. Yeah, other symbols. So speaking of statues then, let's talk about the local landscape and why all this background that I gave you may come to fruition in our little corner of the world, right? So I'm going to cover political factors, historical factors, and geographic factors. After I did this slide, I realized there was probably another way to organize this information besides those three categories. So I also started thinking about geography a little bit more. So I guess the first factor that Orange County can think about specifically is its place in the region of the South, and its place in history. We can think about the relative historical strength in this area of North Carolina for groups like the Klan, which is very, very diminished now, but does still exist. There are still Klan groups here locally. That historical aspect, though, can't really be forgotten. They used to be extremely strong here, especially in like Alamance County, Caswell County, areas like that. There are also lingering effects of segregation. I mean, this is the South. So those factors come into play. It's not usually direct, but that sort of, it kind of sets the mood, I guess is how I would best describe it. You won't have these same historical factors in other areas of the country. They'll have their own issues that drive extremism to look a certain way in other areas that we wouldn't have here, but we do have these issues here. We do have some statewide factors or political factors that make things look different here. So North Carolina is what we would call a swing state or a purple state. That means that there's just a little bit more tension all the time about political issues. There's a little bit more tension between rural and urban in North Carolina. We have some very blue urban areas and we have some very red rural areas. And that's generally true nationwide, but it's can be especially true in swing states and in places like, North Carolina, where we have Asheville and Chapel Hill and that kind of thing. And then we also, unfortunately, in North Carolina have become known for a couple of hot button cultural issues. So remember the bathroom bill controversy several years ago that caused all kinds of mayhem in the state. The Confederate monuments are sort of a persistent problem. Those types of polarizing issues, we have to, those get hung on us because we did it. We have to deal with it. And again, these wouldn't happen in some other localities around the country. They'll have their own different issues to deal with. And then hyperlocal, if we think about literally the counties at the county level or even the city level, we have a geographical proximity to some areas of other unrest. So you can think about the controversy at UNC, just a few miles away, about Silent Sam. For example, the different monuments there, the fact that that campus kind of became a flashpoint for years around monument style issues. Pittsburgh was another area of where the Confederate monument kind of served, as my husband calls it, a lightning rod. It just kind of brings in all of that hate. And then you're right next to Alamance County, which again is very red and very rural, has sort of spawned its own hate group, several of them actually, including ActBack, which is now in tatters. It's not really much of a group anymore, but some of the original members have spun off their own kind of activities, and of course a lot of activity around the Graham Confederate Monument too. And so that tends to leach over across, borders are porous, right? When the ActBack founders were kind of casting about for how to found that organization and that group, they actually created they called it a sister group, which has since been long forgotten. It was called Citizens Against Muslim Refugees or something like that, and it was headquartered in Orange County. Now that group went by the wayside, but it shows the same seed was trying to put out multiple plants, I guess, across those county borders. So geography does matter. So when we're asking the question, why us, it's not only because of local factors, or it's all of this added together, but geography does matter. The people, if they're going to show up to real world events, have to be living here in the real world, or at least nearby. So when they can show up at events in the next county over and kind of learn how it's done and then transfer that a few miles one way or the other, that absolutely plays into the likelihood of a hate group or whatever picking up steam in this area. So next steps. So the front of this talk was just all about background and kind of, what is the landscape, like what's going on right now, and understanding all of that. But then the natural question is, what do we do about it? So this is the beginning of a conversation. These are not the only resources, but I didn't want to leave you hanging with like, go online and find answers. So here's some that I would trust. For parents, Southern Poverty Law Center, which is who I'm a fellow for, has a lab project that they're running with American University up in DC. It's called PERIL, the Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab. And PERIL has put out a really, really nice guidebook for parents on how to recognize some of the things I've talked about today, but at a, I think a more streamlined level. And then specifically how to talk to kids about this, which is definitely not, I have kids, but like, it's not my area of expertise or anything like that. I'm a computer nerd, but they, the folks at Peril have done a really good job putting this guide together. I was listening to them give a talk up in Pittsburgh a couple of weeks ago, and I'm pretty sure I heard them say that some enormous percent, I don't know, 80% of parents said that within 7 minutes of reading this guide, they were, 100% more likely to be able to talk to their kids about hate groups or something. I was like really good numbers. I thought, oh, that's very impressive. So anyway, I can't say enough good things about this work. Links are in the notes, so I definitely want to take a look at that one. You can also just Google like Peril, caregiver guide or something like that, parents guide. It'll come right up. It's a PDF. For educators, SPLC also has an initiative called Learning for Justice. Now, this used to be called, you might have heard it under its old name, which was Teaching Tolerance, I think it was. So they've rebranded a little bit. It's Learning for Justice now, which I think is a way better title. But what this is, it's a little sign-up site, and you go in and you can download classroom resources. You can build a learning plan. They have, all these tools for folks in the classroom, and it's at different levels. So you can work with your students about, historical groups or current events around hate and extremism, and trying to build a better world so that they can avoid those, that grievance trap, right, that we were talking about at the beginning. And then the last part is the de-radicalization and exit strategies. So if someone's already down the path, what do you do with them? It's a little bit late for Peril and Learning for Justice type of remedies. So there are de-radicalization groups. There are numerous ones. I'm just going to list one here that I have. I've met them personally. I've looked in their eyes, and I think they do good work. That's Life After Hate. Again, they're associated with SPLC. But I've also, like I said, talked to them on multiple occasions, and I really think the work that they do is quite good. It's also very intensive and very expensive. I mean, this is like, pulling someone out of a hate group, depending on how far they were into it, is extremely intensive work. And so, anyway, I just can't say enough good things about them. There are, like I said, other groups as well, but this one is one that I can kind of vouch for. So I'm happy to take other questions about that stuff, or if you've heard of a group and you want, to know more about it, etc., feel free to ask those. But yeah, other than that, that's all my info. So we have, I think, at least 15 minutes for questions, which is great. And I would love to hear all of them. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and figure out how to do that. Just stop sharing. There we go.
Dr. Squire, thank you so much for that excellent, rich presentation.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in, and I'm so glad we have time. It
was a lot. So I tried to go slow, and like I said, I have the notes. There's no chat, so I can't really paste them in, but maybe somehow I can get you the link. It's just a Google Doc of notes. So folks want to see more.
I would like to, so are you both an ADL fellow and an SPLC fellow?
Yes, I know, which is a lot. Yeah, this has been an extremely busy year for me, but I don't know if you don't, we have a couple things going on that are problematic in our world. So I was like, well, I really need to be working on this, I think. Yeah, so I've actually taken a leave from teaching for this year, just so I can work on these research projects. The amount, it's just, that's what I need to be working on right now. So yes, I'm a fellow with both of those groups. I study different things for each. So with SPLC, I do a lot more tracking money, follow the money type of projects, looking at platforms that these guys are on and, exploiting that kind of thing. With ADL, my work is specifically on studying the effects of deplatforming. So you might have heard this term, where folks are removed from social media. So like, oh no, Trump is taken off Twitter or whatever. So I'm studying the effect of that, what happens, because there's a couple narratives. One is that it's a great thing, we got to get them off these platforms. The other one is, well, they just go somewhere else and become worse off than when they started. So I'm trying to get the data to actually know what happens when they get deplatformed and how that's different. So that's a bit of an open question. And that's what I'm studying with them. So.
Well, thank you so much. I would like to invite any board members who have questions. I can't quite see everybody at the same time. Bonnie, are you raising your hand?
Oh, I thought I saw a hand, but then I didn't hear.
Bonnie, I think you're muted, Bonnie.
Okay, there we go.
There we go.
So I just thank you, Dr. Squire. I've been following your work. Thank you for what you do. I have, and I'm not sure you can answer this, but maybe I'm not sure if this is a question to you or to my fellow board members. You know, we're a K-12 school system. We have 7,000 kids and about 1,200 employees. So our question is always, what's our role and responsibility in this dilemma? And I love that you use the pyramid of hate. I happen to be a Holocaust educator. I have been for about a decade now. And so, and I use it all the time, but I think we're all on the bottom on some category. And as soon as the conversation becomes us and other, we're on the pyramid of hate, right? So, and to me, part of our job is to keep anyone we can from moving up the ladder to extremism. So, and maybe it's the resources you've given us, but you know, my two questions are, if you're a parent or an educator, what are the things that we have to be looking for in our students to say they're vulnerable to this kind of influence? And then the second part is, what active education should we be providing to teach our students to be more discerning when propaganda comes their way and things come their way that might not be in their interest, but just to be more discerning, because we can't protect them from everything that's going to come at them.
I agree. And that actually, I'll take that second point first, and then we'll go back to the first point about, so the Learning for Justice program in particular does have a big portion of it, at least, you know, online it appears to, and I've talked to the folks that make it, and they agree with this, but it does have a big plank that covers digital literacy and that kind of stuff. Just being able to discern fact from fiction, what's a good argument, when are you being manipulated? That kind of thinking is, I mean, that's critical and foundational to being able to fight off these types of recruitment efforts, propaganda, and so on. One of the things that bothers me the most in our current world is the amount of conspiratorial mindset thinking that's going on. So the idea that, you know, 40% of America can, you know, believe a portion of the QAnon conspiracy theory, to me is just like shocking and mind-boggling, and like this is a huge problem, because it's that mindset of thinking that there's a secret something that's controlling the world. That's a large portion of that pyramid, all right, and of that assignment of grievance to a group. There's conspiratorial thinking that underlies that as well. So it's very, very concerning to think that that many people could be on the path in that way. So those types of programs, like the LFJ program and the Learning for Justice and others like that, do try to strike that root of poor decision making and poor rationale. To your first point about sort of what to look for, and you know, the signals and kind of, you know, what to look for in students and things like that. I don't want to overstate the case or be kind of fear mongering or anything like that, but a lot of the online spaces are really rife with hate speech, negative content, the sort of harmful jokes, and that those lower levels of the pyramid, like you were talking about. Most students, the vast majority, have already been exposed to that sort of thing, and on some of the most innocuous sounding platforms, like gaming platforms. SPLC put out a statistic last year for their year-end hate report. I think it was something like, you know, 25% of kids have come in contact with hate speech on gaming platforms or something within the last year, something like that. And so year over year, that's going to be all of the students. I mean, it's just an enormous problem. They're getting exposed younger and younger, and on places that parents don't usually hang out. You know, I mean, I'm not on a Roblox server, right? Like I don't play those kind of games. And so it can feel very like you can just put your head in the sand and not worry about it, but the kids are seeing it and are being exposed. So the challenge then is how to strengthen them, right? So that they can react well when they do see that kind of content, and then also provide them adults that can help. And then of course we have to take into account the cyberbullying aspect too, when it's not just seeing that kind of content, but when it actually impacts their life. Being aware that saying it's just online, quote unquote, putting that huge air quotes, because that's not really true anymore. The online effects, or the real world effects of online harassment, can be significant. And it's sort of an outdated idea that if something's only happening online, it's not really real. It's not as real as if someone physically punched you or something. I think that people are coming around to that idea. The law, though, is still a little bit behind on that, but we as parents and educators and just responsible adults in the community can start to model that and treat online bullying and bad behavior the way it should, as important as it should be treated. So it really is damaging to kids, and adults too. But yeah, those are great questions. Thank you.
Hillary, Brenda, other board members, other panelists. And we'll have more time for discussion as the time continues, because the last hour is also community discussion.
Yeah,
but
awesome.
Any specific questions for Dr. Squire? Oh, wait, I think I'm seeing a question here.
Can I ask one more?
Hold on, Bonnie. Let me just read.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I have a couple that have come in on the question form. And by the way, there's one for Rebby as well that I'll bring up again in a couple of minutes. But for Dr. Squire, are there any similarities in your findings to more mainstream groups that appear more, quote, sophisticated and educated, but are still supporting, I'm sorry, I'm just having to scroll here, still supporting the status quo of white supremacy? In our recent Chapel Hill school board election, sorry, I'm trying to see this whole thing.
No, it's a great question. I get the gist of it if you can't scroll off, but that's one of the more challenging issues. So I put all those words up at the beginning, right? Like extremism and stuff. And one of the paradoxes that we constantly deal with in doing this work is, how can we use the word extremism when so many of these ideas are mainstream? Actually, when you have, entire chunks of the population voting for someone who's espouses these ideas, it's no longer extreme. The truth is that it actually is still extreme, but it's also mainstream. So it can be both. It can be an extremely damaging idea that's also mainstream. Right. But just to acknowledge what you're saying, those are some of the more challenging figures to deal with, characters, because they do appear to be completely irrational and have support of major organizations that seem legitimate, and yet the ideas that they're promoting are hateful and they are extremely dangerous. Yeah. So yes, very frustrating. Our job is to continually call that out against a standard. So this is the society that we want. These are the ideas you're promoting. I'm sorry, but you are not in line with what we're trying to build here. So regardless of how they look or how many big words they use or things like that, still just calling that out. That's right. It's much easier if you can just other them, like Bonnie was saying, throw someone in a category and they're wearing a white hood. It's much harder when it's your neighbor and someone that looks like you and is using the words that you are also using. Very challenging. Exactly.
Okay, and Bonnie, before I pass to you, there are a couple more questions. So just to finish that thought, because I was able to see the whole thing after a minute. Oh wait, now where to go? Let's see. Okay, I'm going to go to the next one and come back. How can we as a district support teachers who tackle these difficult concepts in their classrooms and may receive pushback from family and or community members? And then hold on one second, I'm just going to finish the piece about the Chapel Hill election. Was basically sometimes white supremacy sounds nicer. So there's an effort by one candidate to run on a grievance that some, quote, affluent white parents don't have a voice on the school board. And so, or is this a more benign minority? So it's easy to name it as hate groups when it looks really ugly, and it's just as important to call it out when it's more subtle. But so then there's the question of how we as a district can support teachers who tackle these difficult concepts in their classrooms and receive pushback from family or community members. So that
that's a little bit out of
to
my
that.
wheelhouse, but just, I mean, I can tell you from experience, you know, researching this stuff. I'm at a university, which isn't the same, I know, but it has been really nice. It was hard when I first started doing this kind of work because the university wasn't as familiar with what I was doing, and certainly didn't understand why a computer scientist would be involved in this. But slowly over time, they kind of came around, and their support has been really helpful to me. So I don't have specific suggestions for the K-12 or that kind of environment, but I will say that feeling support from the folks in charge or the people who are in your world is very key to being able to do the work. And a lot of people will give up, you know, they get pushed back and they'll just have to stop. It's too much. So, but yeah, it is a bit of a problem. You will get a lot of negative attention and negative feedback. That does happen.
Yeah, and I just want to add, it's so important that we're supporting all of our educators and staff as they try to push back against racism and bigotry, because we've already identified we need that diverse group of adults leading and protecting our children. Our diverse student population needs diverse adults representing them. And if we're not supporting our teachers and staff in naming, calling out, stopping racism and bigotry, we will not keep them. It's too exhausting, and we have heard that. So it's really important that we don't waffle on how important this work is. Okay, Bonnie, did you have another question? And we're coming at the end.
Actually, a simple one, more complicated one. The simple one is, you know, I don't know if you're following this, but Wake County Schools is now looking at a pretty egregious policy where if you're online to the school's servers and internet, even with your own personal devices, you should have no expectation of privacy. And I'm just curious how you feel about that. It's pretty extreme, and wondered how you feel about that, those kinds of protections. And then in terms of this kind of broader conversation we're having is, how do we check ourselves? When do we become guilty of mischaracterizing a difference of opinion as extremism? So, you know, how do you know if it's mainstream? You know, they're just maybe to the left of you or to the right of you versus really extremism and dangerous.
Yeah, so the first question, I mean, you know, as a computer scientist, we're trained to, you know, digital liberties and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of like square zero for, you know. So I would say that is a bit of a paradox for me as well, because while I believe in all of that, and I think that that's the default position, should be correcting privacy online is important, I also know that a lot of the remedies that we as extremism researchers give parents and school boards is like, be aware of what your kids are doing, you know, don't check in a lot and ask questions. So there has to be some kind of middle ground between the surveillance state and the complete libertine, you know, privacy world. So I think that's a work in progress, and it's unfortunately not going to be an easy answer. The second question was about how do we check ourselves and not get sort of wrapped up in othering people that just have a difference of opinion, like you say. And this comes into play a lot, I think, when folks start talking about censorship and like the First Amendment and, well, it's my right and I have the right to do this and stuff like that. And those things are true. I think that we have lost a little bit of the ability to discuss. The question is, what issues are worth discussion and what issues just need to be shut down? And so that's where we'll need a little bit more practice. I think sometimes the pendulum swings a little bit far one side or the other. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. I agree that it's a bit of a pendulum swing. So
I love your answer.
yeah. I was thinking about, sorry, my mind went to, the Charlottesville. I actually went there after studying it for so long. My husband and I drove up there for the event just because, Nazis on the streets, like that seemed, that wasn't a matter of a gray area, right? Like, oh, they should have free speech for that. To me, that seemed pretty, like this event can't happen, right? That's pretty obvious, but it's the more, well, this person's saying things that don't quite sound right at a school board meeting or something like that. Like where's the line there? So those issues can be a little bit more gray and trickier to deal with for sure. But there are some instances where we just need to not have that speech happening. So anyway.
Dr. Squire, I have one more question that came to me over email about doxing. If you can define what doxing includes, this person is wondering if finding out personal campaign contributions and posting that online to attack a person is doxing. What constitutes doxing?
To that specific example, that would be considered public information. So doxing came from the word a document. So it meant creating a document with someone's details in it. It used to mean like personal details, private information like social security number, birthday, credit card numbers, that kind of thing. And what you would do is use it as a revenge tactic, and it's illegal basically to put, that level of personal data online about someone for revenge purposes or to harass them or to invite crimes against them, identity theft and stuff like that. Over time, the term has shifted so that now it could, people, I guess, misuse it or have defined it a little bit. So it just means anything from exposing someone's identity. So someone uses a pseudonym, you find out their real name and put that online, to, gathering in public information about someone that was in 10 places and now you have it all in one place type thing about someone. I think the intent in all of those cases is usually to invite harassment or to expose, humiliate, shame, that sort of thing. So so intent is important in defining, why this is happening and what the ramifications of it are going to be. And then what the actual form that it takes, like, is it revealing an identity, which, the media does that all the time, or is it posting actual like credit card numbers and social security numbers and stuff like that? Usually it's somewhere in the middle. But yeah, it's a activity that's used by all sides, any sides of, political, criminal organizations, just all types of people engage in this because the end result, as I said, is to it's for shaming, harassment, or criminal purposes. So it's sort of a blunt instrument, really.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
There was a comment I just wanted to share for Dr. Keeling. At the end of her time, there was a comment. This person says, "Thank you, Dr. Keeling, for the opportunity to reflect and listen. Deep honor and gratitude for your leadership and the parameters you set for this time this morning for permission and expectation to feel." And then there was a comment and a question for Rebby. The comment is, "Thank you so much, Rebby, for brilliantly teaching us this morning and showing up with such fierce love. Thank you to the board for inviting them." And then the question is, if Ms. Kern could please share the name of the researcher. It sounds like you said maybe Dorothy Blank, who's looking at inclusive elementary school curriculum. Would love to read and share.
Yeah, that's Dr. Dorothy Espelage. I'm actually putting a dashboard together for everybody that has some of the resources I referenced during the presentation, some additional resources that'll connect back to the last presentation we just saw. So yes, but Dorothy Espelage specifically researches elementary school age folks and some of their needs and considerations, and it's been really, really important to see.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Without any questions at the moment for Dr. Squire or Ms. Kern, I'm going to pass the mic to Ms. LaTarndra Strong, and she is going to help facilitate this final hour of conversation because, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of our goals is that we are doing this work of supporting our environment for students as a community and in partnership with our community leaders. Ms. LaTarndra Strong is president of the Northern Orange branch of the NAACP, and she has also led Hate-Free Schools and the great effort of banning Confederate flag symbols from Orange County Schools campuses. An outstanding community leader in Orange County, Ms. Strong is going to help facilitate this last hour. So how do we process all that we've learned and discussed this morning, best support the inclusive environment necessary for our students' well-being and success? And I'd also like to mention throughout the hour, we've had a couple of people able to join us. One of our Orange County Commissioners, Ms. Amy Fowler, Dr. Amy Fowler, is listening in. So welcome, Dr. Fowler. And also newly elected Chapel Hill Carbo City School Board member, Dr. George Griffin, is also on with us today. And also, I wanted to mention that Ms. Tamika Ward Satterfield is also a panelist this morning. She is serving on MEBN's Racial Equity Advisory Committee. Welcome, Ms. Ward Satterfield, and thank you for joining us. I will pass to LaTarndra.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'll give a few words to start off with, and then I'd like to open it up for question and answers. And I think because we'll have time left over, it might be make sense to open it for question and answers for all of the panelists, because I will tell you that I have loads of questions for Rebby, I have loads of questions for Megan, and I almost want to do a follow-up for the NAACP so that we could have a more broader conversation for the community. So I will start today because yesterday we got an email from the National Education Director of the NAACP, and he just asked that we renew our fight in education for access to education for all Black and Brown students. And I will, and it would be for all students of marginalized groups, not just Black and Brown students. But I wanted to read just the bottom part of it in my opening, and I'm going to close with this too. So we'll hear it again because it's important, because I think there is a connection, although the connection might not be obvious at first.
You got muted there, LaTarndra.
Okay, I'll start over with with the quote. Black and Brown students are subjected to a curriculum that excludes their experience, unconscionable learning environment, and a looming economic obstacles. And to that point, to bridge the gaps and ensure that all children get a real chance at fulfilling educational goals, together we should ensure that Black and Brown students have cradle to career support, college and workforce success, racial justice in education, and an end to the school to prison pipeline. Every Black and Brown student deserves access to a great learning, great teaching, equitable resources, and a safe learning environment from grade school to college campuses. Black students matter, Brown students matter, and working on their behalf has never been more urgent than now. So, I thought about the fact that we have white nationalist organizations showing up in our school campuses in a very, to me, in a very violent way. And that's happening all over the nation. It's happening from California to Florida. There are reports, if you Google it, there are also reports from Oregon to Massachusetts. So this is a new phenomenon, taking advantage of the soft environment of school board meetings. It's an open forum, and they get a platform to speak and say whatever they want for 3 minutes. And so while that may be happening new in our district, that may be happening new across the nation, it's not new to this district. In 2016, a white nationalist organization came to our school board, and that was ACPAC, and it was mentioned earlier. So in some ways, my piece will just bring in to the local environment the things that are actually happening that Rebby and Megan talked about. So they came in because they were angry that we were forging changes that they didn't want. And in opposition for that, they called on our community to just rally against the Confederate flag change that we were hoping for. And while the names have changed over the years from the KKK to ACT to now the Proud Boys, the ideology is the same. It's the ideology of white supremacy. And the strategies is bigotry, exclusion, and sometimes violence. And by the way, bigotry and exclusion, even if it's not physically violent, is always violent. So I just want to make that point. And so what we do as a community, when we see some of these, some of this being normalized, is we change the names of these organizations and we call them the far-right extremists, or we call them radical conservative groups. And in doing that, what we do is pull up the pillars that cement this as normalcy in our communities. And that normalcy has consequences. It makes them more, makes it more acceptable for them to be present in places like school board meetings. It makes them important in the chat groups across that are supposed to be set up for parents to talk about parent issues, but now we see that they are talking about holding up these very, to me, sick ideologies. And they're promoting exclusion, and it just makes this conversation more acceptable. And recently, in one of the hate groups, that these conversations were initially centered around masks. They're now saying, well, if you want something more strong, or you feel really strong about this, join this other group. And I would imagine that not everyone is going to be accepted in those groups. And that's where you will see some of this really like indoctrination and socialization happening, and really recruiting and changing the mindsets of young people, and also in this case of parents. And we could forget when we name these organizations white nationalist when we name them far-right extremists, or we talk about the conservatism, we forget that the Proud Boys have a history of illegal activity and of violence. They have a history of human trafficking. I'm not making this up. There's an FBI document that's out there that documents this. They have a history of distributing prescription narcotics, illegal prescription narcotics. They have a history of illegal gambling. They have a history of illegal growing fields. And all this is documented online, and you can go out and check it yourself, do your research yourself, because we allow a window for us, and the window in this case happened to be masking, and sometimes we say it's CRT, and sometimes we call it other things, but the idea really is centered around recruitment and changing, making normal these things that have traditionally been not normal. If we just call them these radical organizations, then we forget that we do have language that we offer to Black and Brown people that do the same things. We call them gangs. We call them thugs. We call them criminals. We call them we identify them and their actions in groups, in connections with their groupings, so that we protect people in our community from becoming a part of this group. But when you don't call them what they actually are, you increase the opportunity for them to recruit and for them to grow. And that's exactly what's happening in our community. And I can't have this conversation without mentioning that, like the earlier speaker said, because they are white and because they are men and because they are Christians, we give them privilege that we would not extend to other groups. And that part is just really really saddens me. And so we look and we think about what these groups are coming into our district and actually saying they oppose, what they're actually protesting. So the first is CRT. And I've heard at every meeting that we've gone to about at the school board that there is actually no critical race theory teaching in our district. It's not even anything that's happening in K through 12 schools. So when they say that they're opposing critical race theory, how are you opposing something that's not even happening in our schools? They say they're opposing no masking, but the last school board meeting I went to and the rally that they had on the corner, all of them were fully masked up to their eyes, and some of them wore glasses. So how are you opposing masking and showing up with masking? Because we know that the masking that we're talking about is the masking to protect our community from infectious disease. But the masking that they're doing is the masking to hide their identity so that they can carry out this criminal behavior, and they can recruit in a way without being notified as identified as a racist in the community. And some of them sadly are hiding because we know they have positions in the community that they would not be able to keep if they expose their identity. So they say they're hiding, they oppose the Black Lives Matter movement. Every time I hear that, I laugh because there actually is no Black Lives Matter chapter in North Carolina. So how is it that they're opposing the Black Lives Matter movement when they come to the school board meeting in Orange County? Because we don't have a Black Lives Matter chapter in Orange County. So we have to call it what it is. They are, as Megan said, they're looking for a window to come in and recruit, to grow their community, and then to do these things that their chapter, that their organization have done historically. Either to raise money through this criminal behavior, either to instill fear through violent behavior, and to exclude the lives of people who they don't want to be recognized in this community. And if we don't recognize what it is, we also give them space. We might, instead of recognizing that their speech is hate speech, we might instead say, go online and promote them as promote what they did at the school board meeting as being a violation of their rights. It wasn't a violation of their rights. I was at the meeting that they had, and there were children in the meeting. There were 2 Black children in the meeting. There was an Indian organization in the meeting, and the comments that they said, even though they might be calling for their own privilege, it's harmful to the other people in the room. And we may not recognize that if we're only focusing on the privilege that these white nationalists are asking or demanding. We might cheer on the crowd when we pass the crowd, thinking that they're actually promoting team spirit, when it wasn't actually team spirit at all, because what they were saying on the mic was actually it was homophobic. It was they were saying things about Black and brown people being lazy. They were saying really strong, bigoted things across the mic. So it wasn't about, not one time did they say, Orange County Schools football team, let's win. They didn't cheer on the team at all. So it never was really about a tailgate party. If we don't recognize who they are, our organizations, our agencies throughout the district might work really hard to find the exact space that would fit in all the parameters in terms of the law. They might find the exact 12 feet. They might find this out with the help of the police department so that they could be in a safe space and get their First Amendment rights, and we may not even recognize that we've actually helped them advance and help them recruit. if we don't pay attention to what actually happened, instead of recognizing the things that the group might be doing in a crowd that are illegal, we might instead look at the opposition and make reports about what the opposition is doing, instead of really paying attention to who the people are in this community and what are the links to criminal activity that might be going on as a result of these growing groups. If we don't pay attention to what these groups are doing and what they mean, we might recognize that we might be dismissing the experiences of children who are on the sideline confused and saying, what happened to the leadership in our community to protect us from this sort of thing happening at our schools, this sort of thing happening in our school board, these people recruiting in our community. If we don't pay attention, we might not call out a lot of stuff that is harmful to people in our community. And so I said all that to say that this is a part of the looming environment that our students find themselves in. And that's why I, for one, was really grateful for the policy that came out. And not the policy, but the proclamation that came out, because we needed, those students spoke in their own words and said, we need your support, leaders of this community. We're scared. We don't know what's going to happen. What does it mean that white nationalist organizations are here in our community recruiting? And what we don't know is what's happening in the school system, what other students might be hearing from these young people who might be recruiting. And the point that Bonnie brought up, like, how do we begin to unpack this as a community? How do we begin to unpack what's happening in our school district and why we're right ground for this sort of thing happening in our district, and avoid the potential for young minds being co-opted at a very early age? So those are the things that are on my mind. I'm sure there's more, but I want to open it up for more panel discussion and more community questioning. Thank you.
Carrie, is it okay if I jump in here for a second? I want to thank you, LaTarndra, for all of those thoughts. Your voice and perspective are always so important, and I'm grateful you're here to lead us through this section of the meeting. I also just wanted to mention, you mentioned the resolution that our board passed, and Commissioner Dr. Amy Fowler is on the line, and I wanted to thank her specifically and the Board of County Commissioners who passed a resolution in support of our staff and our students last night and our board. And I just want to extend my gratitude and appreciation for the county leaders who are supporting our students in this time. And so Jean Hamilton and I'm trying to think, the commissioners have really stepped up, and I'm grateful for that. So I just wanted to mention that right now.
I'd also like to thank LaTarndra for leading us today in your powerful words. We always need to continue to be challenged. And so I thank you for helping me with that, LaTarndra. Ms. Ward Satterfield, would you like to join in the discussion? We can come back to her if she doesn't want to. Other people who would like to join in the conversation or have questions for Ms. Strong?
I have a question for Megan, if that's okay. Megan, we had a discussion recently with Tony, your partner, and about with the NAACP leadership, and we learned some things about what recruitment looks like for these organizations, and the initiation process, which I thought was pretty telling, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be different for each group. It's also worth mentioning that a lot of times, especially in the more modern and online context, some of the groups don't look like the way they used to with membership cards and rituals and that kind of thing. But to the extent that there are still groups that do fit that mold, yeah, sometimes they have rituals. It could be just a simple thing as you pay your dues, you get your membership card, but some of them have more elaborate things. You're probably thinking about Proud Boys and the ritual that they have, which is an interesting one. It's designed to look like a joke. It's basically to get to level, I think it's level 2, you have to stand with a circle of Proud Boys around you, and they punch you until you can name 5 breakfast cereals. So it's ridiculous, right? That's really dumb. But they use this joking as a front, like, oh, how could this group be dangerous? They're obviously doing this ridiculous ritual. And then it also takes a page out of the more like a gang initiation ritual. Like it's kind of from that mold, but with this added jokey layer on top. So yeah, it's kind of, I guess, teaches us a few things that they're going to consistently use jokes and memes and lighthearted humor to try to mask the more nefarious intentions of the group, I guess, and that's pretty typical. And then it also tells us that they do value the real world experience. So they do have this real world thing you have to do to become a member of the group. You have to show up in person. So it's not a completely online phenomenon, which is sort of one of the hallmarks of Proud Boys. Other groups are perfectly content to be online sort of propaganda pushers. They have very few meetings, if any. Proud Boys really do meet frequently and in person, starting with, like I said, day one, when you get sort of beaten into the group, I guess. So interesting. Different groups do different things, though. That's just one that kind of stands out among the groups. But yeah, that's probably the one you were thinking of.
Yeah, that was the one I was thinking about. They actually are a fight club, so to speak. And I also wanted to add too, by the way, for the doxing question, that most recently what I've seen is that they are taking an image of a person and actually spreading lies, like saying things like you might have a similar name of a criminal, and they will attach that criminal record to the person's name that they're trying to adopt.
Yeah, I mean, all those forms of harassment, it's designed to just get under your skin and bother people, and it's that sort of persistent drumbeat of harassment. It's pretty easy to do that online. It's very hard to report that behavior a lot of times to get any action. Even if their account gets taken away on Twitter or whatever, they'll come right back with a new one. So yeah, it's very frustrating to be the target of that. It's extremely damaging. And imagine for the younger you are and the less experience you have with sort of letting stuff go, or the more marginalized communities, it's very, very damaging and hard to deal with. So it can be just distracting. It starts impacting your life. So this is what I was talking about before when people say, well, it's just online. That's not a thing. We need to stop saying that. That kind of persistent harassment it does take a toll. Completely agree. And it's under now the umbrella term of doxing, but it takes many forms. So, and they can be quite creative in how they apply that weapon.
LaTarndra, can I jump in? I just wanted to say I appreciate, Megan, that you mentioned you started with the likes and dislikes of those groups, and you had white and male. And something that I've noticed as I've been reviewing some of these recent events is really there's been a lot of misogyny in a lot of the ugly events we've seen. And so, you know, we need to be supportive of our LGBTQ and also our girls and women in our schools. And we have some excellent equity leaders, including one of my daughter's white male teachers, an excellent equity warrior in his classroom. But it's just really important that we're supporting girls and women, and that I think that our white boys and men see the value in supporting diverse communities, and I know we have students doing that as well. And it's just so important to foster opposite from the message that you said is the concerning one, which is there's not enough of X and I'm going to lose it, lose what I have. I mean, I think that's it's at the heart of this struggle as a community.
Yeah, the gender issues are cross-cutting. So when we talk about different flavors of hate groups or different styles or different ideologies, whatever you want to call it, anti-womanness or misogyny, you know, that is cross-cutting. It seems to appear in all of them, and it's one of the, if not the only, belief that does that. Even groups that are not pro-Western or not pro-white specifically will be pro-male over female. That's for sure a thing. Second to that, I think, and very closely followed on that is almost cross-cutting would be the anti-LGBT beliefs. That follows pretty closely behind. There's a few groups that will kind of allow that begrudgingly, but yeah, your point is well taken. I want to point to the work of colleagues at the Institute for Studying Male Supremacy. So they're doing amazing work. I think they're out at Stanford or Berkeley or one of those. A group called Ultraviolet focuses on women's issues is doing a male supremacy workshop in December that I'm going to actually be attending. So there's groups that are kind of starting to take that on a little bit more. I know SPLC added male supremacy as a hate designation a couple of years ago to try to reflect this. They already had anti-LGBT, but then adding the male supremacy designation. I think the issues got a lot of attention with the rise of incels, the involuntary celibate community, and some of their issues and their violence. And so that sort of put the issue front and center and you know, made people take this seriously. But yes, I would say that your observation is correct. And also from a data point of view, that is one of the issues, or the anti-women, anti-LGBT pairing, I guess, is a cross-cutting issue. So completely agree.
Could I pop in here as well? Thank you. Something that's coming up here as an offering of an additional analysis to the anti-LGBTQ lens is that violent colonization is deeply impacting that conversation, particularly on the deep held sense of the binary, of the gender binary. So to this point of white male supremacy, when that power is threatened, quote, quote, that's when we see so much anti-trans violence, particularly among Black trans women. And this all comes back to the violent supremacist concepts of gender. And so when we saw the anti-trans sport bills pop up across the nation, we saw this group that's, I would say, periphery to our conversation today, the Save Women's Sports. And these folks are actually towing the line for a lot of what we've just covered today and taking on this violent standpoint that somehow biological men are harming society. And that's a deeply, deeply connected piece here. So I just want to elevate what Megan has shared and bring some context into that and some really direct application that's still quite raw.
Can I jump in there? I'm sorry, I did forget to mention something else that was really important for me that I share in this meeting, is that while we're talking about these organizations, I will tell you that that there has been an uptick of racial violence in this community, in Orange County. Some of the more, one of the more widely examples is when the young woman was punched at Brinkley Church in the face by a white guy who just showed up at a protest. In fact, it was a silent protest. All they were doing was holding up signs, and he walked across the street and punched her in the head. And then more recently, a Black man, I think it was about in February, was followed off the road on the freeway. He was on his way to work. He was followed off the road on the freeway and was hit in the head with a bat. And the two young men jumped in their truck and ran off. And our police community, it's more complex than this, but nothing essentially was done in both of those cases. So these heinous events happen, and there seems to be no consequence, or should I say, very little consequence. In the case where the man was hit in the head, there hasn't been any consequence at all. In fact, and in the case with the woman, there was the consequence was going to racial equity school, which is good, but it should have been among other things. And I'm not a fan of jailing people, but I do think that what I am seeing that when these things happen, there's two things that happen. There's no consequence for the behavior, and there's no record in our community that these incidents actually have racial implication, or they were sparked because of discrimination and bigotry.
Dr. Felder and Dr. Keeling, would you like to join in the conversation? I know earlier Dr. Felder had some mic issues, so I wasn't sure if she was waiting to say something.
I'm very appreciative of this conversation that is being had. I just think that it would be great if we could figure out how to come together as a community and wrap support around those to Ms. Strong's point, those who feel it and who are impacted by it, and how often that gets lost in the conversation. So I appreciate this space for us to have the conversation, and just ask that we would continue to find ways to wrap those systems of support around those who are impacted.
So thank you. I continue to have some technology related issues, so I'm on a borrowed laptop right now. But first I want to say this is one of the most rich and informative meetings that I've participated in. So I want to thank each and every presenter and Mrs. Doyle and the entire board for making it possible. Just a couple of things. One of the things that I heard over and over again that Ms. Strong said in terms of mentioning community. And so, you know, this work is, and this matter that we find ourselves dealing with is much bigger than the school district. The school district alone, while this is a school board committee meeting, it is certainly much bigger than the school district. And so I appreciate so many representatives from the community coming together. And I would just pose rhetorically, what are our next steps as a community? Because it will take the community working together to overcome what we are currently embracing, so that we can continue the business of educating our children, as this has certainly served as a big distraction for us in our work. But I will also say that I will certainly continue to reflect on and process what I've heard and learned today as related to the important work we're committed to in Orange County schools, and that is the work of embracing diversity and bringing the board's equity policy, policy 1030, which is explicitly about race, but not exclusively about race, to fruition. We're not there yet, and we have a long way to go. But in so doing, we will certainly create a more civil, welcoming, inclusive, and high-achieving school district for our children. And that's something they so desperately need and so desperately deserve. So thank you for this opportunity and for this convening.
Thank you, Dr. Felder and Dr. Keeling. We're going to have a lot to think about, continuing conversation with as a board. And I know as a board and as a committee, we're going to continue looking for opportunities to listen to our students, specifically in some upcoming student forums where we're going to center the conversation about obstacles they may be experiencing to having a strong sense of belonging in their schools and classrooms. It's so important that our classrooms and hallways and athletic fields and bus stops are safe spaces, and that that they feel supported if they report harmful behavior of adults or fellow students. And so we do have a long way to go. And so we're trying to do it. We need everybody's support. There are other board members or other panelists who would like to ask questions or comments as we near the end of our hour.
Good morning. Tamika Ward Satterfield here. I would first like to applaud you all, especially our board members and Orange County School faculty for the work that you're doing in this space. It's hard work and it's needed work. And as a fellow educator and especially as a parent, I really appreciate your efforts. I just want to take a minute to just encourage you not to be distracted or sidelined. In my experience, and especially in just my recent short experience with the Mebane Racial Equity Committee, distractions are real, right? And people will join your meetings. They will send you emails with information that is just distracting to your mission and to your purpose. And I just encourage you not to bite, and not to think that your goal is to change everybody's mind, right? I need the school board and our district leaders to work on changing policies, practices, and procedures that ensure all of our students feel welcomed and valued in the spaces that are in our schools. So if you don't change my mind or my neighbor's mind or whoever's mind, that's not a loss, as long as you create policies, practices, and procedures that ensure all of our students can thrive. So thank you all for the work that you're doing. Thank you for allowing me to be here this morning. Maybe reaching out to you, Rebby, I'm sorry, for some more information. And I just look forward to the continued conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Ward Satterfield. I want to read one more comment that came into the Google forum. It's a good, this isn't the last word. There's time for other people to close out, but this is a good thought as well. This person wrote, feeling so grateful to be a parent in this district and community where this deep, rigorous, real conversation and analysis is happening. Are there immediate asks from the board or Drs. Felder and Keeling to fully enact the equity policy, recognizing we share responsibility for finding solutions and wondering if there are actions you've identified that need support now? So that would be support from parents. So Dr. Felder, Dr. Keeling, other board members, responses to that question.
So I will just say that one of our next steps with IDRA is to do a walk through the 3 most recent resolutions around hate, indigenous, people recognition, and then our last resolution from last year, next steps towards equity. So to do a walkthrough with those resolutions as well as policy 1030 to come up with measurable action steps, like so that we're actually doing what we said we were going to do in the policy and the resolution. And I think as I have those meetings and put those in the equity plan, it will become much more concrete. What is the work that we need to do with parents and community? But I will say that any kind of conversations that parents are starting to have, to Ms. Ward Satterfield's point, like we spend a lot of time trying to convince people, and that's the whole tactic, right? To distract from us actually being able to do the work to show the results. So it always is like, oh, equity isn't working because we never actually get to do it. So we need parents to have those conversations. And I always think of New Hope Elementary, and whenever they have their like PTA meetings, they now ask me to be in there as well as their English language development coordinator to be in there, so that they have recognized that they have blind spots. And so they're always asking, what did we miss? And how do we bring in more of our families of color, because we may be missing something. And then I always have parents that just reach out and say the same thing, like, how can we help? And that's a good thing. Like, that is so encouraging to know that there are members of the community that are asking, just tell us what we need to do. And I would just say, any ways that you can begin to have these conversations with other families, with other parents and guardians, any ways that you can bring them into the conversation, that would be very helpful. I think even for me at school board meetings, it's very overwhelming to sit in that space and to have the conversations or the comments that are being made. And it makes me just feel any little bit of better to hear someone get to the mic and say, no, we need to do this, and we need to make sure our students are okay, and we need to make sure that they belong. And to Rebby's point, like, lives are at stake, not the proverbial lives, like real life lives. When we go back to mental health and talk about suicide rates, it is because we're sitting in situations where students don't feel like they belong. So we can't have a conversation about mental health and not have a conversation about all the ways that students are being pushed out of their space and how uncomfortable that is. So yeah, I would just say that, and I will come back with more actionable steps for parents to take, but having these conversations is a good first step.
Yeah, and I would just echo what Dr. Keeling said. We are certainly working towards more actionable steps for families. But I think one of the greatest things, silence also speaks, and so speaks volumes. And so if you are truly behind the work that we are endeavoring to do, and that is, again, to bring policy 1030, the district's equity policy to fruition, to just be, very overt about that, and not be quiet about your stance for the work. The more voices that are speaking in support of the work that we're seeking to do is helpful. And so more actionable next steps to come, but just hearing the voices and acknowledging the support is a good first start. I am sensing it's there, but honestly not always sure the degree or depth of the support. We're certainly going to continue to move forward because, as I said, this is a matter that is a critically important for our students and for the community. It is the right work to do, but knowing that, again, that it's larger than the school district, and knowing that you have the support of the community means a lot. And I think sometimes we don't always feel that support. And I think sometimes it's just assumed that we know, but when the voices are there, it makes a huge difference. So that's a great place to start. And yeah, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Felder. I know Ms. McKenzie has a comment she'd like to add.
Thank you. One of the things I want to add on to Dr. Keeling and Dr. Felder's thoughts, which I appreciate so much, is the importance of our community talking to our students and our kids about these issues outside of school. Because when we empower our kids, we empower our teachers, because then they bring up these issues in school and they bring it to the conversation in the classroom. And they are not too young to lead this work, and they are not as attached to things as us adults are. Like, you talk to kids about gender fluidity and they're ready. Talk to them about anti-racism, they're ready. And the more that we can empower them and educate them and make them comfortable with conversations that are hard for adults, the more we're all going to come along. So my big ask to the community is to have these uncomfortable conversations. You know, if you don't have all the answers, that's okay. Tell your kids that. They get it. And I just think that that's how we break down some of this. So thanks.
I echo that. As a parent of 3 teenagers, I have learned so much from my teens and their peers, and watching them support diverse friend groups and classmates. It has moved me so far, so much faster than I would have been able to grow and learn on my own. And I'm so thankful for our students, and they really are the equity champions among us. And I also want to say how important it is. I'm so grateful that we have folks from Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools and our county commissioners, as Hillary mentioned. So thankful. James Etta Bedford emailed me yesterday to share that they're voting on that resolution to support us. And I was so grateful, because it really helps when we feel like we're the board speaking to something and we're in it alone and we're getting terrorized, literally, in our board meetings and before our board meetings and after our board meetings. It's pretty lonely and intimidating. And so it feels really good to know that we have a One Orange equity policy, and that our Board of County Commissioners has an equity policy, and our equity policy is not going anywhere. So we need that support of the broader community, because this is not just a Orange County Schools problem. I again want to thank, oh, go ahead, Hillary.
We mentioned earlier that Dr. Fowler was on, but I also see that Chair of the Orange County Board of County Commissioners, Renee Price, is here. So thank you, Commissioner Price, for the resolution last night and for being here today. We appreciate you.
I want to read one more comment that just came in that I really appreciate. The comment is, thank you all for creating this safe space to learn and reflect. I have a couple of noticings and wonderings from this session that I'd like to note. As a white Christian man and a parent, I notice a limited amount of people on the call that share in my race and gender identity. There are potentially many reasons why there is such a small representation. However, this is noticeable. I wonder what my next steps can be to continue to best support this work, and how to continue to lift our district's belief around equity to a place of action. Thanks again for your dedication. And I just appreciate the comment. And I feel you as a white Christian myself. And so thank you for being here and listening. And it's a lot to mull on, and just thank you for showing up. Okay, once again, I have a lot of speakers to thank. So thank you, fellow board members, for joining. Thank you, Dr. Keeling and Dr. Felder, for your leadership of our strategic plan and our equity plan. And I know this has involved so many people in Dr. Felder's cabinet and staff. I'm really appreciative that Ms. Blefka was with us this morning, as she is a leader in our Latino community. Thank you for our fellow elected officials who are here. Thank you, Ms. Wirt Satterfield, for being here. Thank you, Rebby, for your excellent presentation. I'm so glad that we're going to be able to keep working with that material, and also Megan for your presentation. And thank you, LaTarndra, for your guidance and leadership. We need you. Any other closing comments before we adjourn? Okay, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. I'll second it. We can adjourn. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation today. Have a great weekend.
Video.